Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Cause Leadership Podcast. It's my pleasure to have our guest, Duke Chang, with us today. Duke is the president and CEO of CanadaHelps, an organization that is probably familiar to many people across this country. It has certainly been the catalyst for much fundraising support for many charities, and so we're going to talk to Duke a little bit about that today as well. But just by introduction, Duke has been a seasoned executive now for over 25 years. He's served in financial services and technology. Duke's expertise lies in driving innovation and product-led growth, evident in his role as the worldwide head of product, business development, and customer experience for Lenovo Solutions and Services Group. His keen ability to identify customer needs and develop intuitive solutions has been instrumental in his success, including the co-founding of Act 3 Reality, an education technology company aiding children with autism and other social and learning challenges using virtual reality. During his tenure at Fidelity Investments, Duke spearheaded critical innovations across the financial services world. Duke is dedicated to diversifying the impact of CanadaHelps, and particularly in empowering small and medium-sized businesses. So, Duke, welcome to the Cause Leadership Podcast. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me here. Looking forward to it.
Great. Duke, you've made the transition from the corporate space, as we've talked about a little bit in your intro, to the charitable sector. And yet CanadaHelps is also a technology company in and of itself. So just wanted to get your sense of what was that transition like, and what was it like to now be serving many charities, upwards of 20,000, I think, in the charitable sector today.
Yeah, we actually serve close to 30,000 charities, Dave.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned in the intro, my career has really been at the intersection of financial services and technology. And for a long time, that was in the for-profit world. And when the opportunity to join CanadaHelps came along, it was really an opportunity to say, take everything that you learned, take everything that you know and have done before, and apply it to good instead of just applying it to, a stock price.
Yeah.
And so that was really appealing to me. And it was just an opportunity to do something different with my career. The transition to the charitable sector has been an interesting one because I think there's both positive differences and some negative ones. On the positive side, I no longer do have a share price to worry about, which is nice. No longer the pressure of, the stock market and everything else. I just have to balance my budget and do as much good in the world as possible, right? Which is actually, as a leader, really freeing to not have to worry about that other stuff and competing priorities. I'd say on the challenges side, when I first came into this sector, everybody kept talking to me about the sector is doing this and the sector that and the sector the other thing. And I thought, wow, this is exciting. This is like a really well organized industry, and there's all this stuff going on. And what I came to realize was it's not well organized at all. It's really 85,000 plus small businesses out there for the most part. Oftentimes, sometimes competing with each other, and sometimes not collaborating as much as they could be, because they are sort of islands unto themselves sometimes. And I think that's a real opportunity for us in the sector, is to think about how we do more stuff together, and the rising tide floats all boats theory, and getting the sector to uplift.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, because part of the issue facing the charitable sector in Canada today is the fact that we have over 85,000 charities, and is that sustainable? And in order to make that work, do we need to look at mergers and amalgamations, or other maybe not so directly legally amalgamating, but collaborating and finding ways to work together, as you said?
Yeah, I think, who knows what the right number is, right? I'm not the arbiter of that. What's clear when you have that many is that if you think about the charitable sector, something like 70+% of it is either has 5 or less employees or is entirely volunteer run. Most charities have less than $500,000 a year in revenue.
Yeah.
And so they really do behave like small businesses.
Yes.
And that means charities, for the most part, can't take advantage of economies of scale, right? And we keep doing things over and over again, 85,000 different times, because we're not centralizing the the use of resources, right?
Hmm.
I think Canada Helps is actually one of the unique examples of that, where we're sort of a central utility to fund online fundraising for the sector writ large
Yeah.
to use, right? But are there other services that we could get to economies of scale at if we were able to centralize them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a question that I think will continue to have to be asked for the sector as we move forward. The next 5 or 10 years are going to be pretty significant when it comes to charities in Canada. I appreciate what Canada Helps is doing in the sector, Duke, and we'll touch on Canada Helps a little bit later in the podcast. But when you look at the talent pool today in the charitable sector, we have a significant transition of leadership that's happening right now, partly
Hmm.
due to retirements, but as well as other issues that leaders are facing. Certainly, we're seeing teams changing. Fundraisers are in high demand and low supply as far as the talent that they bring to the marketplace as well. Um, and of real importance, I think, and you've identified this as well, is the whole digital skills and capabilities side. Um, could you talk to us a little bit about that as it relates to talent for the charitable sector moving forward? Digital is already and will play an even bigger piece in the future, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's certainly a gap that we see, right? I think you do have an interesting dynamic in the workforce right now, right? This is the moment where we sort of still have four generations all in the workforce at the same time.
Absolutely.
One is starting to transition out and one is coming in, but it means a variety of different backgrounds and skill levels,
Hmm.
particularly when it comes to digital. If
Yeah.
you think about the new generations coming into the workforce, they grew up digitally native, right?
Hmm.
Even from the millennials forward, they grew up in a time when the internet existed for everyone.
Right.
And that makes a huge difference, I think. When we look at the sector as a whole compared with the for-profit sector, the sector is woefully behind on digital.
Hmm.
And that's both just a lost opportunity in not being able to take advantage of all the digital capabilities to become more operationally efficient, but it's also a risk when it comes to things like cybersecurity, right? I think the cybersecurity for most of the sector is security through obscurity. They're too
Yeah.
small for a hacker to really notice them.
Right.
But it is a danger, and I think we have an obligation to think about how do we modernize the charitable sector
Hmm.
so that they can keep up, right? And that's a
Yeah.
lot of what we're trying to do at Canada Helps right now.
Can you talk a bit more about cybersecurity? Because I've heard you mention that before, and it seems like it is a high risk situation that boards and executives need to be aware of.
Absolutely. If there are board members out there listening, you should be asking these questions about cyber and your cyber posture, right? We know at a very surface level, for all charities, cybersecurity insurance has gone up. And it's gone up
Mm.
for everybody, but it's particularly impactful for charities because they're often always already dealing with narrow budgets. But if you think about cybersecurity, there's all sorts of threats, and they're largely highly correlated with AI these days. These aren't
Yeah.
simple threats anymore. These are very sophisticated attacks. And oftentimes we'll see that when that happens to a charity, because usually when a bad actor gets into a charity, the first thing they go look for is the money, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so I think it's a real risk. We've had some very public cybersecurity breaches in large charities in Canada, but there's probably other smaller ones that just don't make the news today.
Are there one or two really practical steps that you could advise charities to be taking right now?
Yeah, the first one is a real simple one. Like, if you don't have strong password management and password protection, you should put that in place. That means one, having multi-factor authentication, the thing where you have to do the thing on your phone
Yeah.
or some other device to log in. You should put that in all your critical systems and make sure that's turned on, right?
Sure.
The second is using a password manager to have complex passwords. Nobody wants to remember a 64 character password, but there's technology that can help
Right.
you with that these
Sure.
days, right? But having varied passwords, making sure you're managing that, honestly will eliminate a lot of the threats out there if you do those two things.
We've talked about Canada Helps being really, in some senses, a technology company in and of itself. Um, is that something that you'll be able to serve some of the smaller charities with in the future?
We hope so. We
Yeah.
hope to continue to provide all sorts of digital capabilities to charities.
Hmm.
If you think about it, there's a common set of uh, jobs to be done inside of any charity, right? Whether,
Yeah.
and it's not unique to any charity. So whether it's fundraising or HR or financial management and accounting or donor or volunteer management, all charities kind of do this stuff. And
Mm.
so the more we can help them digitize some of those jobs and provide that's economies of scale to them,
Yeah.
the overall more operationally efficient we can make charities
Yeah.
and therefore provide more resources to do the programs, which is the thing that they care about.
And obviously, Canada Helps is playing a part in that. Now, you're leading you're leading that organization, so you're needing to look at growth for yourself and for investment in technologies, investment in talent. Um, let's maybe just start with the investment in technology side first, and move over to talent. But Canada Helps has been a significant player for fundraising, and as you're mentioning, potentially in other areas as well. What does that mean for you as an organization and you as a leader as you're trying to build and grow Canada Helps to meet the needs of meet the needs of charities for the future?
Yeah, so we've been really fortunate to have a 24-year history of doing
Yeah.
this. And, we thank all the charities that have been with us that whole time.
Hmm.
The thing that we can do is continue to expand upon the model that we have today, which is being that digital infrastructure for fundraising,
Yeah.
to some of these other areas to help provide some of these other services and digital capabilities to the charities at scale.
Yeah.
I think that's a real opportunity for us to drive more value to our clients. At the same time, there's still lots of opportunity for us to get more Canadians engaged in charitable giving and
Hmm.
engaged in their generosity, right? We haven't talked about what Canada Helps does on the donor side,
Yeah.
which is really we are a platform for all Canadians to find charitable causes to contribute to.
Yeah.
And we need more of that, right? Dave, you know the numbers as well as I do. We've been on a 30-year decline in participation in
Yeah.
charitable giving in Canada, and that that creates issues, right? 57% of charities have told us they have more demand for their services than they have resources.
Mm.
We're at this moment of critical need where, almost 1 in 4 Canadians are turning to charities right now
Yeah.
for the basics, whether that's, food or shelter or clothing.
Hmm.
So charities are serving a critical need in our country right now, and we need those who have the resource to recognize that and recognize the incredible work that charities are doing and support them in this moment.
Yeah, as I was thinking about our conversation today, one of the questions I had that came to mind was when you consider the work that charities are doing today and the immense need that's in the market and the amount of pressure that's being put on, particularly frontline charities and the people that work for them. My sense, and this was my query for you was, what are you seeing as far as burnout and the needs that our talent are actually facing in the sector today? It strikes me that it's fairly significant. Just curious what you're seeing as well.
Yeah, I'm hearing stories of that too, Dave. Look,
Hmm.
there's only so much blood you can squeeze from this stone, right?
Yeah,
And
that's right.
uh, people at charities have been always tireless workers because they believe so much in what they're doing. But
Hmm.
in a moment where resources have been stretched, during COVID, a lot of volunteers went away too.
Yeah,
Um, and so this is a point where people have been continuously trying to do more with less, but
yeah,
there comes a point where that just doesn't work anymore, right? And
yeah,
that's, I think, some of what you see in the burnout
yeah,
in staff and people choosing to do something else, along with just the general economic conditions out there, right?
yeah.
Like, it's no secret that the charitable sector is not the highest paying employer out there,
Right. Yeah,
and inflation, we know what's gone on with that in the last few years. And at some point in time, people are sort of having to make choices and say, can I actually afford to do this anymore?
yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's a very real question for a lot of people that have been working in the sector for sure, and even for those that we might want to attract to the sector, right? So, um, compensation is a big piece for people when they're looking in. Um, let's maybe jump into that then, if you don't mind, Duke. The issue of talent in our sector today, there is that downward pressure, certainly around compensation and the amount of work and, as you say, blood from a stone kind of thing. But as a leader who has to hire people and teams and fill important roles in your support of other charities, How are you finding the talent market? What are the challenges that you're facing when you're hiring? What are the things that people are asking you for as a potential employer?
It's an interesting time in the market, right?
Mm,
With the combination of the different generations in the workforce and the other
yeah.
market dynamics. One of the things that we were able to do as an organization as a result of the lockdown and COVID was we started hiring nationally more because
Yeah.
everything was virtual and location was no longer an issue. We've continued as a remote first organization even after
Mm,
things have opened up, which has allowed us to really broaden the aperture of where we find talent in the country. And there's some great places for talent across this country, right?
sure. Yeah.
So I think that has helped out. If I look at the candidate pool, there's certainly, depending on the function and the type of thing you're looking for, more or less talent. There is certain scarcities out there. I think data science and data
Hmm.
people continue to be a scarcity, for example, on the technology side. The thing that I see is shifting is what the talent is asking for from the
Mm,
employer, right? I think they are making different calculations now than perhaps before. Um, Certainly with the newer generation coming in, and this advantages our sector, actually. I think
okay.
they are looking for meaning in their work and they're
Yeah.
looking for purpose in their work, which our sector offers, just oozes that. So
Yeah.
that I think is to our advantage. I think if we can offer a balanced lifestyle, that's another key aspect, I think, of the new generations coming into the workforce.
Hmm.
And for us being a remote first organization, that is certainly part of the value proposition,
Hmm. Yeah.
right? And then they're looking at, who am I going to be working with? Are these people I actually want to spend my day with, even if it's virtually?
Right. Yeah. No, I've noticed that you've what are you calling them? Your jamborees that you're doing. Is
That's
that
right.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
Which I think is great. And so you're bringing your teams together in person. On How often are you doing that?
Right now we're doing it once a year. So the
Okay.
Canada Helps Jamboree is our once a year gathering of
Hmm.
all of our team. Currently, just we bring them all into Toronto because that's still where the majority of our folks are,
Sure.
and it's really a time to connect and build those personal relationships that you may not do as easily
Hmm.
online.
Yeah,
And it's by far the highest rated employee event we have.
that's great.
Um, and it's a great investment that complements what we do as a remote first organization.
Yeah, no, that's great. Some of the team that is remote, so not based in Toronto and perhaps in far-flung areas of Canada, uh, what challenges have they communicated to you as far as being part of the team at Canada Helps?
It's not the same as it used to be pre-COVID, right? You can't
Yeah,
just swivel your chair around and have that conversation. So you have
that's
to be
right.
a lot more intentional in the planning of your time.
Yeah.
Uh, we use an online collaboration tool like many organizations use Slack for
Okay.
communications, and we
Hmm.
actually have a Slack channel called the Water Cooler channel that's
Okay.
specifically for those casual conversations that aren't work related. And we have other channels for posting pictures of your pets and other things to build that sort of connection. So
Okay.
I think that's one challenge.
Yeah.
As we stretch coast to coast, Canada's a big country. Having those core work hours in the different time zones where we can
Right.
actually connect, across all the different time zones becomes an important period of time and organization that's required to make sure we have our critical meetings during times that are acceptable for everybody. Right. So
Yeah.
that's some of the management things that we have to do. And then having that ability to actually make real connections,
Hmm.
whether it's the Jamboree or other meetings where we might be bringing departments in together, are also critical things to make sure we're building those relationships.
So when it comes to hiring talent, and it doesn't just have to be about Canada Helps in this case, but just generally from your experience, what are the biggest challenges that we face? You mentioned that we have four generations in the marketplace, so hiring within that context. So we've got builders and boomers and millennial and Gen Z, all with different sort of mindsets around the roles that they want to play. So particularly that question, and related to that, as you see, um, as as we transition from sort of more of a boomer leadership to Gen X, maybe not being necessarily the size of generation that we need in order to assume some of the leadership roles. How do we invite the millennials up into the leadership positions that they perhaps have not been given opportunity to step into yet? So there was I think, three questions in there, Duke. So let me back up. Hiring for four generations. Let's start with that.
Yeah, well, first, I think there are four generations that are still active in the workforce, and
Yeah,
so you really have to take that into account in your sourcing processes to make sure you're not introducing bias there, right?
yeah,
I think
okay,
bias both in the Gen Zs as well as bias in towards the boomers, right?
yeah,
I
sure,
think there's still a lot of talent and valuable contributions that they have to give to an organization. And so
mm,
I think that's one thing everybody needs to consider. And then the other is the different needs that each generation has coming into it, right? Some may not be as digitally and technically savvy,
yeah,
and some don't want to do with anything that's not digitally
sure,
enabled, right? And so balancing that off. And then I think the other piece that we've seen at least is when it comes to the total employer value proposition and benefits,
yeah,
right? Those are four very different stages of life,
yes,
and
absolutely,
you have different needs in those stages of life and different things you're looking for from your employer. We've gone through the process of evaluating our total employer value proposition
hmm
and really designing around flexibility and choice because the needs of each generation is so different.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'll reframe the question I was posed after that. So, just from the perspective of the boomer generation moving towards retirement, my observation has been that Gen X might be suitable for filling 50% of the leadership roles because I think we didn't do succession planning really well 20 or 25 years ago when we needed to for the
Mm-hmm.
sector. And now the millennials, which are the largest generation by sheer number, and now the largest living generation, and almost, I think, representative of close to 75% of the workforce now. Um, that's really where I think our key leadership potential and the emerging leadership has got to come from. But in some cases, perhaps they're not as ready as we would hope they would be. So, leadership development and the potential for developing the leaders, particularly out of that mid 30s to early 40s category. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like as a Gen Xer, in our personal lives, we're probably we've been called the sandwich generation.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, and in this context, in the work context, we're almost sort of the bridge generation, right?
Sure.
Having to bridge between those two. I think the millennials I know at least are chomping at the bit for the opportunity
Yeah.
and really, really craving that responsibility. I think there's an important role that the boomers can actually play in this in
hmm
mentorship.
Yeah.
What I find missing oftentimes is the millennials, have have gotten work experience, they've gotten some development and coaching at work, uh, what they're really missing oftentimes, and I don't know why this is particular for this generation,
Mm.
is those mentorship relationships with folks who may be in the same field or not, but outside of their work, right?
Yeah.
Not just another person in their management chain who's taken them under their wing and acting as a champion, but really somebody outside of their organization who can be that sounding board for them, who can help guide them. And I think
hmm
that's a great opportunity for boomers to play in that.
Yeah. Do you see them stepping into those roles?
I do. I
You
do.
do. Okay.
I see a lot of folks who are in that generation who have said like, I don't want the really hard grind anymore. Like
Mm.
I've done that, past that phase in my career. I'd still want to keep active.
Yeah.
I'm not really ready to do nothing. So here's a great way for me to share what I know, and to really make a contribution without having, the daily grind, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And are these would those folks be employed in the charitable sector already, or are you thinking people from outside the sector?
Depends on the situation. I think yes and
Yeah.
no, right?
Okay.
For example, charitable fundraising is a fairly unique beast, right? You
Yeah.
can't take somebody out of the finance world in the for-profit sector and necessarily drop them into that.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but there are other, areas like technology and marketing and other things where you could have mentors from the for-profit sector,
Yeah.
and absolutely have value to that.
Okay. No, that's good. Um, Leading teams. You have a sizable team at Canada Helps, but as you said, there's many smaller organizations, the majority of the smaller charities across the country, but they still have teams, and the volunteers play into that category. The board members certainly play into that category as well, um, and and yet we are a sector that is facing adversity. We Canada Helps released the annual giving report recently. As you alluded to earlier, I think giving is slightly up, but really from the more traditional uh, channels that it has come from, and not as high in others. So we are facing some adversity. That's an understatement. We're facing a lot of adversity, I think, as a sector. Yeah, how do you lead teams through adversity in these times?
I think that's the biggest challenge for a
Mm-hmm.
leader. It's easy to lead when things are going good. It's easy
Yeah,
to lead when everything's going up and to the right.
yeah,
It is much harder when times are tough. And I think in order to lead in those times, one, your job as a leader is to always have a North Star for your team, right?
yeah.
Why are we doing this? And making sure everybody understands the why
Mm-hmm.
and believes in the why.
Sure.
And then your second job is to make sure you get the best you can out of them and make them the best version of themselves at
Mm.
work.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example from my past. I came into a new role, and one of the first things that happened when I came into the new role, we were working with an external partner, is everybody from the leadership team from that partner quit to go start their own company, and they took all the A players with them.
Yeah.
And so what was left for us to work with was essentially the B players who weren't picked to be in the cool kids club.
Sure.
And my job was to actually get the project done with these folks who kind of were left behind.
Mm.
And so the challenge was to motivate them to say like, hey, we can still do this. This is still a really important mission for us. This is really what we're doing. This project is critical to that mission.
Yeah.
How do we actually do that as this team, and almost put a competitive nature to it? Like, let's show them what we really have. Let's show them what they
Mm.
missed out on by
Yeah.
not picking you guys, right?
Yeah. It's a sector where the talent that we are able to attract uh, is highly mission driven, and in most cases, I would say, um, and yet we're asking them to work in adverse conditions in many respects, and that can just be the nature of the work because of it being very frontline oriented, whether it's healthcare or food banks or international NGO work that happens in the field. So some of it is really quite adverse just because of the conditions that people are working in. But adversity comes in different forms too, and certainly from uh, the as we mentioned earlier, the talent perspective around fundraising. Very high demand uh, and uh, and an intense role. Let's be fair; it's not an easy job by any means. Um, and yet, we're having a lack of talent available to do the fundraising roles that we have. And I would say that's right across the country. And some bigger charities maybe don't feel that pinch as much, but certainly the majority of the mid-size and smaller ones do. Um, so when you look at a talent pool like that, which is I would say uniquely gifted in the sense of being able to build relationships and ask people for money, um, not unlike somebody in the sales side of the corporate sector. So I don't want to disparage anybody from the corporate side. But when you look at um, fundraisers today, what are the key elements of success for them as they look forward? Let's say the next decade of fundraising talent that we need for the sector.
Fundraising is our mission, right?
Yeah,
And what I think sometimes gets lost, and I try to talk to our team about this a lot, is fundraising is the thing that creates the fuel necessarily to make the rocket ship take off,
yeah,
right? You're not, as the fundraiser, you're not out there directly feeding people or housing people or fighting for social justice, but none of that can happen without the funds. And so
yeah,
making sure people understand how critical that is really important. And then for the folks who are fundraisers today and into the future, being able to communicate how those funds that they're trying to get out of a donor
Yeah.
actually contribute to changing the world and doing social good is really important, because it's not just an ask for money, it's an ask for money with a purpose. And being able to, with all the 85,000 charities that are out there, being able to talk to that donor about how your organization is uniquely positioned to serve that purpose in that community
Yeah. Yeah.
is really important, because there are a lot of folks out there who need resources. And so
Yeah.
that is going to be a fight for competing resources.
I don't know if this is the solution, although I think it is certainly part of it. The partnership with corporate sector partners and organizations who, there's some of the obvious ones that we've seen out there in the healthcare and food bank space, and even housing. But corporate partnership seems to be a growing trend across the sector, the charitable sector, and so I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about it in the context of sustainability and ESG, because I think that is starting to align itself with some of the charitable realities, especially around the social category of ESG and even governance. So, first question, let's talk about corporate partnerships. Is it the right way to go for charities, and what advantage or success have you seen? And then let's jump into the sustainability question after that.
Yeah, I think corporates and corporate citizenship is absolutely critical.
Mm,
We are they're the largest part of the economy, right? And so
yeah,
they, by definition, have the most resources available to them. Uh, when I think about what's going on in this moment in time with corporates, and
yeah,
the fact that there is dedicated focus on citizenship, the fact there is dedicated focus on ESG and corporate responsibility, and however you want to frame it these days,
hmm,
purpose, that brings them to the table
yeah.
in in waves that we haven't necessarily seen before, right? I
Okay.
think uh, some of that is driven by their nature and realizing that they do have a role to play in some of
Hmm,
this,
hmm,
and some of it is driven by investors who are demanding it and saying, like,
yeah,
what are you doing, right? And
yeah,
so there's, and customers who are saying, well, what are you doing
yeah,
in this front? And so there's an absolute impetus for them to get involved. Charities should figure out how to get engaged in that and really find ways and organizations to partner with that align to their mission. It's
yeah.
not just finding any corporate sponsor. Like, if you
Right.
want to find a corporate sponsor and put their logo on a banner for your fundraiser, that's one thing. But really finding a true partnership
Yeah.
where the company's mission and your mission align, that's where there can be real value created, right? I'll give you one example of our own, and then another one from another organization. I think external to us, I think everything that Furniture Bank has done
Mm,
with IKEA has been a fantastic partnership, because it's a win-win for both, right? For Furniture Bank, they are getting furniture to much needed families
hmm,
at a very low cost in partnering with IKEA. And IKEA is not only doing good, but also solving one of their own logistical challenges of what do we do with returns.
mm,
So
yeah.
that is a great partnership, because it benefits both organizations, and it does social good, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
On our side, we've had a multi-year partnership with MasterCard ChangeWorks. We were actually the first organization they funded in Canada through
Okay.
the ChangeWorks program, really around digital skills. In partnership with them, we launched Charity Growth Academy, which is really a platform for organizations to do an assessment of their own digital skills, where they are today, where they need to be, and build a roadmap out and get some mentorship and guidance. That aligned obviously with what we do in providing digital capabilities
Yeah.
to charities. It also aligned with MasterCard's vision of where they wanted to play in being able to provide digital equity
Yeah.
across the markets. And so that was another example of a great partnership where it made sense for both organizations to do together.
So when you look at that, Duke, from the corporate partnership perspective versus what has, in some traditional charities been government funded. I'm sure some of that funding is now at risk. Um, and even the major donor pool, right? When I look at generally, when I look at our demographics, we've got boomer leadership leaving. We have boomer board members leaving, and we also have boomer major gift leaders leaving, right? Or earning less than they used to, and so maybe not giving it the same capacity. So perfect storm kind of happening in that sort of boomer level. So when we start looking at partnerships with corporate, do you see that kind of becoming kind of a main relationship that most charities should be going after, or how do you balance out going after corporate but also maintaining your major donors and also maintaining your kind of annual donors? What's the mix that you're sort of seeing from your perspective?
Yeah, I think diversification is the name of the game,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
If you're a charity out there and you only have one revenue stream,
Yeah.
you really ought to be thinking about that and really think about how do you cultivate and grow multiple revenue streams, not just from government, not just from individual major gift donors,
Yeah.
but building a broader donor base, building a social enterprise where you can actually generate revenue.
Yeah.
I'm seeing charities really thinking about diversification of their revenue streams
Yeah.
as a critical path to their futures, right? Not counting
Yeah.
on just one source probably is going to put you at risk.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and in fact, you bring up a great note there. It's just that whole social impact side. And that this sort of ties back to my question around sustainability. As organizations look at ESG, uh, particularly the corporate sector, and obviously publicly traded companies, I think are going to have an even higher degree of reporting on that coming up this year if it hasn't already started. We've got some competing funding going on here. So some funding is going to get attracted to the charitable space still, which is great. Some of that thinking and funding is being diverted away from charities more to sustainability and uh, ESG issues and that type of thing. And then there's the whole sort of business side, the social impact, charities creating their own businesses to drive revenue that way. So a lot of things that are merging or emerging right now in the sector, and competition for talent in that as well, because some of that talent is being driven out of the charitable sector and into the sustainability ESG world. Some of it's being diverted a little bit into that social impact space as well. All that to say, there's a lot of stuff that's moving right at the moment. Is there a pattern out there? What are you seeing that's going to sort of bring alignment or collaboration amongst all three of those areas?
Yeah, so first I would say for the talent who is out there looking at these things and prioritizing impact
Mm-hmm.
as one of their decision-making criteria,
Yeah.
really make sure you understand the organization's view towards impact, right? Is impact
Yeah.
the mission, or is impact a byproduct of the mission, or is impact a necessary evil of doing the mission,
Okay.
right? And those
Sure.
are three very different
Yeah.
categories
Yeah.
that
Totally.
are out there right now. And you have to see, right? Like, I think there are some people who are in organizations out there where impact is the entire mission, and charities
Yeah.
certainly fall into that.
Yeah.
And yes, they may have a social enterprise to help drive revenue to support that mission, but the mission is the North Star,
Yeah.
and impact is the North Star. There are some organizations out there who are driving secondary impact as a result of the business model that they've chosen, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that, right? The buy
Mm-hmm.
one give one is a great example of
Yeah.
that,
Sure. Yeah.
right? Like there's real impact there, but there's still also a different North Star, which is driving profit and shareholder value,
Yes.
which is the key decision making criteria there.
Yeah. Totally.
And then let's face it, there's organizations out there where impact and ESG and all that, they're doing it because they have to.
Okay.
Let's just call it that. And so as a person looking for roles, you have to sort of evaluate that, right?
Yeah. Okay.
When it comes to charities having um, social enterprises, I think that's great. Again, it's revenue, building and
Mm-hmm.
diversification. I think it oftentimes these social enterprises aren't just random things, but they do actually align to mission.
Sure. Yeah.
And it potentially helps them bring in new people into the fold that might not initially have known them as donors, but known them as other things, right? And
Mm.
said, oh, this is an interesting organization that I'm supporting. What else can I do for them? Can I volunteer
Yeah.
for them? Can I do other things for them?
When you look at our sector today, ours being the charitable sector, what do you see as one or two things that we really need to embrace to help grow our revenue, and also to have the people that we need in place to have the impact that we're looking to have through our charities. I'm trying to look through it through the glass full or glass half
Hmm.
full perspective as opposed to the glass half empty. I think we can do that all day, and that's not necessarily helpful. So how do we look at it through that glass that's half full and try to fill it up, so that we're meeting the revenue targets that we need in order to achieve impact, but we're also doing it with the right level of talent in order to support all that's going on.
I think first thing is continuing to have a long-term view
Hmm.
while worrying every day about the here and now when it
Yeah,
comes to revenue. So
sure.
yes, you have to continue to invest resources in stewardship of your existing donor base, especially your major gifts, and building out these revenue streams. But you have to invest some, at least, in the emerging donor segments, the younger donors, right?
Yeah,
Because while they may not have a ton of disposable income in their pocket today, some of them may one day. Some of them may be in a position to inherit wealth, as
yes.
we have intergenerational wealth transfer going on right now. I
Yeah,
think there's like
absolutely.
tens of billions of dollars on the move in the next few years from that.
Yeah,
So having a strategy around how do I start bringing under my tent these younger generations and aligning them with my cause
yeah,
is really a long-term play. They may not have a ton to give today. Some of them will because they've
yeah.
done really well for themselves, but over time they may. And so when
Hmm.
we ask charities, how many of you have a specific strategy built out for young donors? Only 19% of them said yes.
Is that right? Wow. Okay. That's significant.
So there's work to be done there
Yeah,
to start cultivating that audience and those potential future big donors today while
yeah,
they're not. So that's number one on
absolutely.
the revenue side, along with continuing
Yeah,
to diversify revenue streams.
sure.
I
Yeah,
think on your second part of this was around the talent, right?
yeah,
Um, Again, I think it's building that pipeline and evolving those opportunities to develop people. I think the charitable sector, there's so many organizations in the charitable sector that are great opportunities for people to cut their teeth, learn
yeah,
their trade, master their trade, but don't let go of them at that point. Well,
yeah.
maybe let go of them for a little while, right?
Mm,
If they decide to leave your organization, because you might be a small organization, we're even
sure.
kind of a small organization, and some of them may need to go out to go up,
Yeah,
but keep that relationship with them. Maybe they boomerang around to you eventually later on in the career, right? Keep that relationship going. I think one of the most powerful things that corporates do is build an alumni network, right? Our
yeah.
charities
Right.
out there
Yeah,
building an alumni network and not letting somebody walk out the door either displeased or completely disconnected from them because one day that might be a future donor for you, and
yeah.
b that might be somebody who comes back to your organization at a more senior level when they've rounded out their experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of wisdom in that for sure. Duke, I want to give you just a chance to talk about Canada Helps a little bit just as we close. Obviously, it's been a significant player and supporter of many charities, as we've talked about already, but heeding your advice around cybersecurity and some of the things that Canada Helps will be able to help with in the future. But on just as we close, one or two things that you're really excited about as far as Canada Helps and even what you're doing in your role.
We've been around 24 years. We are connected to over 30,000 charities,
Yeah.
and we've now just this year surpassed the $3 billion all-time fundraising mark,
Wow.
which is
Amazing.
an amazing story for the organization,
Yeah.
truly.
Hmm.
I think we still have so much headroom to go, though. I think we
Yeah.
still have so much opportunity to build generosity into Canada and
Hmm.
Canadians. That's my North Star,
Yeah.
is how do we get more Canadians engaged in this, right? How do we get it to the point where when you go abroad and somebody finds out you're Canadian, the first thing they say is, "Oh, Canada, you Canadians, you're so generous with each other,"
Mm.
right? Not some crack about poutine or hockey or
Right.
how
Yeah.
clean the country is or anything like that, but
That comes later.
like yeah, that can come later, but I
Yeah.
want us to be known as the most generous people in the world, and I think
Yeah.
that's truly can be part of our DNA. So I think we have a part of our mission to do that. And part of our mission is to make the sector more operationally efficient
Yeah.
and get to some of these economies of scale that are achievable if we start acting as a sector.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you. Duke, it's been a pleasure to interview you today and to get some of your perspective on our sector here. And certainly just grateful for all the work that you and your team at Canada Helps are doing to support other charities. And appreciate your time and look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Well, thanks for having me on the program, Dave. I appreciate you and cause leadership as well.